The UK is about 5 months away from becoming South Africa. The country is falling apart and nobody can stop it anymore. I know how that sounds, so let me put an actual number to it. 5.82%. It sounds like a boring number, but this is a number that proves that the UK is falling to pieces. The number is what the UK 30-year government bond hit last week. I'll explain why that's horrible in a bit, but just a basic summary, it means a lot of people think the UK is broken, and I'm starting to agree with them. Look, every country that collapses follows roughly the same path. First, debt gets out of control and the bond market loses patience. It starts charging the country a premium just to keep funding it. Then the skilled professionals start leaving. The doctors, the engineers, the young graduates, they just leave. They get out of there. Then the infrastructure stops working. The lights go off. The water stops running. Then the currency gets debased. Wages stand still while prices run away. And the official inflation numbers, they stop meaning anything. And the politics, they blow up. New parties come in out of nowhere. Prime ministers in revolving doors. The bond market openly picking who runs the next cabinet. That's the path that Argentina walked through in the 70s, that Greece walked through in 2010, that South Africa is walking through right now and has been for a while. But Britain is running a masterclass on following this path. They are somehow doing most of these things at the same time right now. Normally it's a progression, but damn, the Brits are multitasking a collapse. And I'm going to show you exactly how and why the next major hit is 5 months away, roughly. My name's Nick. I've been a professional investor and unprofessional trader for 24 years. Why am I qualified to even talk about this? Look, I lived in the UK for a long time, 2009 to very recently. So I've seen this collapse happening in real time. Let's crack into it. So look, to understand where the UK is going, you need to understand where South Africa actually came from, because it's a very good comparison. April 27th, 1994, South Africa holds its first free democratic election. Nelson Mandela's ANC wins 63% of the vote. Mandela is inaugurated as president on May 10th. And at the time, the rand is trading at about 350 to $1. So $1 buys 350 rands. Rand is a South African currency. The country has the most advanced industrial base of the entire African continent. Working power stations, world-class wine regions, a functional middle class, skilled professionals in every major industry. On paper, a developed economy. The future is bright for South Africa. But then you fast forward to today. The rand is now sitting at 16.50 to the dollar. So $1 buys 16.5 rand. That's a 360% devaluation in 30 years. Johannesburg has had 9 mayors in less than a decade, a revolving door. Unemployment is at 32.7%. Youth unemployment is at 45.8%. More than 1 million skilled South Africans now live abroad. In 2024, 90% of young South African graduates said that they want to leave the country. That figure was 39% in 2021, so it's more than doubled in just a few years. South Africa did not collapse overnight, though. It ratcheted its way to collapse. Load shedding became accepted, then water shedding became accepted. That's basically rationing of electricity and water. They have to turn it off because the infrastructure just cannot keep up. They turn it off for a little bit, then they turn it back on. Then 75 murders a day felt normal. Then half the wealth creators in the country left. And it just became part of life. Each failure was normalized before the next one arrived. That's the South African model, a slow creep where every new flaw becomes you know what, I call it the South African model, but really it's just the model of many collapsing countries. It's the model that they follow throughout history. But South Africa is a very recent example. And right now, the UK is heading down that same road. And I don't think anyone can stop it. So let me give you evidence. 5 checkpoints on the same road. But like I said, the UK is just multitasking these. Checkpoint, I shouldn't laugh, it's not funny to be honest. It's a very sad situation. I lived in the UK for a major part of my life. I love the country and it's sad to see what's happening to it. Anyway, checkpoint 1, the bond market. Bond traders, in my experience, are the smartest people in the room, the smartest traders in the room, because they live in this place called reality, whereas stock traders, they live in this place called fantasy. And we saw this in 2007 and frankly, too many other times to list. Bond traders are usually the ones who get it right. I should stop picking on stock traders though. Let me explain how bonds work real quick for those of you who don't know, because it's a bit of a kind of confusing word for a lot of people. Countries issue bonds as a way of borrowing money from people, institutions, other countries. It's how a country funds itself. They sell a bond. If you hold that bond until maturity, which can span anywhere between 2 to 50 years, you get interest plus all of your money back at maturity. It's awesome. When a country is running well, inflation low, debt under control, bond rates tend to go down, the interest rate you get paid. Because you want to hold it, then they pay you less interest to hold it, demand. When a country's economy isn't doing great, inflation is sticky, debt is high, bond traders demand higher interest rates, and there's a lot of reasons for this. One of the big ones is that when the interest rate, they want the interest rate to outpace inflation. So when bond rates on the 30-year go up to 5.8%, which is the highest since 1998, by the way, bond traders are saying Britain is broken. And like I said, bond traders are generally the realists. They're the smartest people in the room. So I tend to believe them. Why do bond traders think this? Well, the numbers in the UK aren't good. UK public sector net debt as of March 2026 is 2.9 trillion. That's nearly 94% of GDP. So the debt is 94% of GDP. That's an absurd number. Annual debt interest repayments in the UK are now 110 billion per year, pounds. That's roughly the entire UK education budget. It's more than the defense budget. It's money that vanishes into bondholders' accounts before a single nurse, teacher, or soldier gets paid. The Office for Budget Responsibility says that every 1% rise in gilt yields and bond yields, they're called gilts in the UK, bond yields, adds another 15 billion a year to that interest bill by 2030. And yields just hit a 27-year high since 1998. Sterling just had its worst week, by the way, in the last 18 months. It hitting 1.33 to the US dollar. So basically, £1 buys $1.33. There's a phrase going around right now. It's a kind of a funny one, but it's also sad. It's called the Moron premium. That's what bond traders are now charging Britain to hold its debt. So it's called the Moron premium because they're saying your country is led by morons, so we want more interest to hold your debt, to buy your bonds. And the extra yield they want is compensation because they think a post-Starmer Labour government might engage in what one analyst calls, and Starmer is the UK Prime Minister currently, by the way, so a post-Starmer Labour government might engage in what one analyst called fiscal adventurism, which is a very British way of saying we think you might do something very stupid with that money, so we want more interest. And history says they will. And I really need to stop laughing. It's a serious situation. It just, sometimes things are so sad that you may as well just laugh. And look, I'm going to talk more about this later because if Starmer is out, that means that the UK has been through 6 prime ministers in 6 years. The guy that might take his place, by the way, is called Andy Burnham. His name isn't anything special, but anyone who cares about the economy and the fate of the country thinks that he's a horrible choice. Even JP Morgan is reportedly considering scrapping a $3 billion UK investment if Burnham takes over. And over 60% of mergers and acquisitions, by the way, I read this number the other day, it's crazy. Over 60% of mergers and acquisitions for UK listed companies are now from overseas, which means that the country is being picked apart, or the companies in the country are being picked apart for parts. It's a hard sentence, but you get what I mean. So where have we seen this before? We've seen it in South Africa, Russia, Argentina, Turkey. I could go on. It's a long list. But let's talk about South Africa because it's a very recent example. So in South Africa, foreign investors decided that the country was way too risky to be a long-term home for their money, and they left. And that's what's happening to the UK right now. And when people aren't investing in a country, young people, educated people, people with the means, flexibility, freedom, they just leave, which brings us to checkpoint 2, the brain drain. It's so bad for a country when young people start leaving, especially the brighter ones. It's one of those economic signals that people don't really pay attention to as much as they should because it isn't a raw dollar or a pound figure. It's not a big scary number, but really it's just evidence that a country's future potential is leaking out. Like if the potential was a bucket full of water, right? And it has a hole in it and that's slowly leaking out. That's what's happening to the UK. The ONS revised its emigration, different to immigration. Immigration is when people leave, right? Emigration data last year. More than 250,000 British citizens left the UK in a single year. There are British passport holders just walking out. They're just leaving the country. And it gets worse when you zoom in on who the people who the people are. It's people UK can't afford to lose. Nearly 5,000 foreign trained doctors left the UK at the end of 2025. That's up 26% year on year. 42% of licensed UK doctors qualified abroad. So the NHS has a homegrown brain drain and an imported drain too, happening at the exact same time. Very similar to South Africa or any nation that is falling to pieces. Young, educated people leave. But let's focus on South Africa because it's in the title. I read a stat about them that I just can't get out of my head. Among young South African graduates, intent to emigrate went from 39% in 2021 to 90% in 2024. I said that at the start, so it's not a surprise. That's an absurd number. The brain drain in South Africa is driven by people who could fix the country, refusing to stay in a country that won't let them fix it, which is just what is happening in the UK. And when the fixers leave, nothing gets fixed. This is true of Italy, it's true of Greece, and much of Europe, to be honest, these days. But you know what's weird? Poland had this problem for a long time, and they somehow turned it around. Polish people immigrated to the UK for a long time, and now they're doing the same. They're leaving the UK and going back home. So it is fixable if a country gets its act together. But why are so many British people leaving their homes? I've talked about a few reasons, but there's another big reason. Checkpoint 3. The infrastructure is just falling apart. Now, this is another one of those signs of a failing economy that doesn't really make the front page because it's not a big, scary number, but it's a key sign that things are getting bad in the UK. And I'll give you an example. Thames Water. In the first 6 weeks of 2026, Thames Water dumped 80,000 hours of sewage into England's waterways. That's a weird way to measure sewage, but what it means is, apart from it being disgusting, by the way, it's a sign of infrastructure collapsing because it just cannot cope. But you don't need to track sewage to see this. Thames Water is battling a $3 billion bailout crisis right now. There's a massive call for nationalisation. Basically, the government takes control of the company, which sounds okay on paper, but then you have to remember how incompetent the UK government actually is. Anyway, the point is that London is one of the most expensive cities on the planet, and they can't even manage their water properly. Actually, do you know how much it rains in the UK, by the way? It's basically a swimming pool. This should be the least of their problems. Water. They can't even get water right in a place that rains like 200 days out of the year? It shouldn't be a problem like it is in South Africa. At least Johannesburg has an excuse that it's a bloody desert. Nearly half of Johannesburg's water is lost to leaks, theft, burst pipes before it even reaches the tap. Nearly half of South African wastewater treatment systems are officially in a critical state, dumping raw sewage straight into rivers like the UK. Johannesburg residents go weeks without mains water. They have a word for it. They call it water shedding. Look at Thames Water and look at Joburg's water and tell me with a straight face that Britain isn't going along the same path. But it's not just water, by the way. The rail network, roads, bridges, energy, the power network, housing, building, digital infrastructure, local government and public services, trash collection, hospitals. The country is falling to pieces. Fiscal squeeze for local councils is spreading across the UK. Over the last decade, more and more reports have flagged structural funding gaps for councils, which underpin everything from social care and children's services to libraries, planning, local roads. You can't blame young people for wanting to get out when their town is falling apart around them. Over the last decade or two, as they've grown up, they've seen their beautiful town falling to pieces. And this is all a symptom of a failing economy, a failing currency, which brings me to checkpoint 4, the most important one. The pound is being debased. Every country walking this path eventually hits the same wall. Hyperinflation, or just out of control inflation. Let's not exaggerate and call it hyperinflation. It's a late stage symptom of collapse. The currency stops keeping up with reality. The cost of being alive outruns the wage you earn. Look at Argentina. Inflation hit nearly 290% last year. The peso went from, I think it was 200 to the dollar to over 1,500 in 18 months. People queue at supermarkets twice in a day because prices change between morning and afternoon. Look at Turkey. Inflation has run at 50 to 70% for 3 years straight. The lira has collapsed against every major currency on the planet. South Africa has not been as bad. They've only been running with 5 to 7% inflation for decades. The rand has lost roughly 80% of its real value since 1994. I already talked about that number. This is what late stage collapse looks like. The number on your payslip stays the same. The price of bread doubles. You go to bed every night and you feel a little bit poorer. You get a little bit poorer. You don't feel it. Now, look at the UK. The Office for National Statistics will tell you that the inflation figure is around 2%. It's back to target. Nothing to worry about. Just move along. That is the official number, but we all know the truth. Grocery bills in most Western countries have doubled at the very least since COVID. That's not 2 to 3% inflation per year. That's not the number that they feed us. Energy bills have doubled, taxes are up, insurance premiums are absolutely ripping higher. But to be fair, this is happening all over the Western world. It's not just the UK. Inflation is eating people alive, and the official inflation numbers are just completely rigged. We all know they are. They're bullshit. They're supposed to measure inflation by looking at a basket of goods, the average shop a person does week to week. But they swap out those items in that basket for items that haven't gone up as much, and they smooth out the numbers. They average it all out. They strip out food and energy from the headline figure and call it core inflation. And then they wonder why nobody trusts the data anymore. Then they publish a number that says everything is back to normal. It's not. Sorry, I'm getting a bit heated. Let's go back to the data. £100 in the year 2000 now has a purchasing power of about £55 today. Not too dissimilar from the US, $100, $55. It's very close, actually. The pound has lost nearly half its real value this century alone. Real wages in Britain have not risen since 2008, not in real terms anyway. 18 years of working harder for the same actual buying power. It's the first generation in 200 years of British economic history where this is true. The house price to earnings ratio has gone from about 4 in the 1990s to roughly 9 today. Wages have technically gone up on paper, but the currency is getting debased so fast that wages aren't keeping up. When a country owes 2.9 trillion and has to pay 110 billion a year just to service that debt, debasing the currency stops being a policy choice. It becomes the only choice. Basically, you cannot tax your way out of a hole that big. You can only inflate the debt away by printing so much that your currency becomes worthless. And look, we all know that the US has a similar debt problem, but when you're the global reserve currency, for now anyway, you can afford to have that problem. When you're the UK, France, South Africa, you can't afford that problem. Well, you can. You can by doing more austerity, but people are austerityed out. Like I said, the infra is already falling apart, so austerity, you just can't do it that much anymore. People are broke. Technically, you can outgrow your debt, but you can't outgrow it in the UK because who wants to invest in the UK right now? Everyone is trying to divest from the UK. Anyway, why am I saying 5 months? Why October 2026 or November 2026 specifically? Because that is when every fiscal pressure point in the UK converges into one fiscal event, the budget, taking place in October or November. And that's going to happen with soaring fuel prices, which, by the way, there's currently fuel duty cuts in the UK. So basically, the government's subsidizing fuel prices a little bit, but they're going to start being removed in September. So fuel prices, which are already rising, get even higher just as wider fiscal pressures start to hit. And the political situation is already on fire in the UK. Wes Streeting resigned as health secretary on May 14th. He cited a lack of vision and a drift at the heart of the government. And he stated on the record that Starmer will not lead the Labour Party into the next general election. Nearly 100 Labour MPs have publicly called for Starmer to resign. His net approval is minus 46. 70% of Britons think that he will not be Prime Minister by the end of 2026. Why am I going on about this? Because that means, like I said earlier, that there will be 6 Prime Ministers in 6 years in the UK. That is dysfunction at a level that most Western countries have never reached. It's an unbelievable level of dysfunction. And this sort of dysfunction is fairly normal in a government that is falling apart, in a country that's falling apart, but nothing quite like cycling through 6 prime ministers in 6 years, though. That's special. That's a British special. This is a fragile country running into a perfect storm. And the budget comes as fuel prices soar, LNG prices soar, another prime minister is done away with. And remember that number that we talked about at the start, 5.82%, that is the price of a 30-year gilt today. They're called gilts in the UK, a 30-year bond. In May, right now, that's the price. And that number heavily influences mortgage prices. So Britons that are already being squeezed from every angle could see mortgage rates fly up. They're probably going to see mortgage rates fly up. Before any of October's events happen, And then you got to think, if 5.82% is what the bond market charges Britain for fear, what does it charge for crisis? The UK is an absolute mess right now, and it's quite sad to see, don't you think?